Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clintstone Ch.3. The emotion in Clintstone's voice when he finished speaking was vast. In his voice I could hear the sorrow of his loss, deep and painful. I could hear the betrayal when a being that he had thought his friend was responsible for the deaths of everyone that he knew, everyone that he loved. I could hear the regret and the guilt as Clint felt he was responsible for the deaths of his world. He had told them that it would be all right, that the swarm had broken their word and Clint's people had paid for it. It was not his fault, but Clint thought it was, and under it all I could hear the strong undercurrent of anger and hatred that came from his soul, hatred for everything swarm. The sentiment was loudly shared by Baywa. "Those are utter beasts," he shouted, spluttering with rage. "They have done terrible things, and I would think a total genocide would be beyond even the most depraved beings." The rest of the council's faces grew tight with anger, as they felt as well. Even Cerberus was angry with something other than Clint. I watched with his face contorted with rage and thoughtfulness. It was an interesting combination. The two expressions warred across his face until they settled into a sullen brooding. Seeming coming to a decision, Cerberus stood up. "Upon hearing this news side, I am in agreement to let Clintstone into the rebellion." He sat back down, eyes turned away from Clint. The Wraith next to him nodded as well. I vote for him." Clint stood in the center of the chamber, shaking with rage from his memories. For as long as I had known him, Clint had always kept his past to himself, only revealing the smallest of pieces, and only after a long ordeal. For him to bring it all out here showed the depths of his determination to join this rebellion. True, it had been brought out in anger, but Clint could control his anger where he wished, most of the time. I did not know how to process what I just heard. I had known Clint's past was a dark place, but I had just thought that it was his family that he'd lost. As dark as that was, the loss of his whole race, a being he trusted, must have done things to him that I couldn't even want to think about. And it was the Emperor of the Swarm Empire that had done it. Clint's threat that he was going to remove the Emperor's head hadn't just been an idle one. He truly, deeply meant it, and he was going to see that the Emperor was dead. He could focus his rage on a single being and let it go. Two, if you counted the Admiral who killed his children and led the attack on Earth. I knew Clint did. It was justice, I suppose, that perpetrators of those terrible crimes were to face a retribution unlike anything else in the universe. Scour cleared his throat, his silver-fuzzed face unreadable. "By the decree of the Council, Clintstone is deemed enlisted with the rebellion against the Swarm Empire." "Hear, hear," said the Gowan. The rest of the council nodded their heads in agreement. Scour turned his face to me. "Now it is your turn. Why do you wish to fight in the rebellion?" I paused. Why did I want to fight in the rebellion? I had never really thought about it. I had just been following Clint around for the last 2 years. I didn't really decide what I wanted to do in the beginning. I had gone with him because there was no other choice. He was the only way off Noirs, and I had meant to leave after we touched down in the nearest port. But I'd stayed. I didn't really know why. He had been a stranger, full of anger and odd. I wanted to leave, but I had stayed, and I was glad I had. Clint had shown me that there was other things in life than personal gains. I had been a greedy, selfish being when Clint and I had first met. He had been as well, but I know now why. I had just been like that because I had been easy. Had I not gone with Clintstone, I would still likely be a selfish Jahan, thieving and wretched. Now I was a being from a fairy tale. I saved the lives of innocents, fought tyrants, and travelled with other legendary beings. When I had been younger, my mother used to tell me of such stories of great heroes, and how the people looked up to them and adored them. But the heroes of those stories had done the things that they had done. Not for glory, not for fame or riches, but because it was right. I knew then why I wanted to join the rebellion. Because it's right, I said. Because I need to. If I don't, who will? This galaxy is on the brink of complete domination by the swarm, and I am able to help stop them. This is why I would join, to do what is right. I have no personal hatred for the swarm, no reason that I wish them all dead. But I know that they must be stopped, and I would help in that endeavor. The council stared down at me, their faces blank and unreadable. I tried to read their faces, but it was difficult. I shifted in my place, waiting for them to say something. "I," said the Harath. I looked up. He nodded at me, his face still blank. "I," chorused the rest of the council. I let out the breath that I hadn't realized that I was holding. I was in, and I was officially a rebel. The thought almost made me chuckle, but I stopped myself. Scour stood. "By decree of the council, Dedix Jakku is deemed enlisted in the rebellion against the Swarm Empire." He looked down at us. "Congratulations. Now the hard part begins. You will be evaluated and placed in an area best suited to your talents. I do not doubt that you will be warriors, but one must make sure." He motioned with his hand at Jem stepped forward. "Good luck," Scour said as Jem led us from the room. The doors swung shut behind us, and we walked out into the base of rebels, preparing to fight the Empire. For the first time, we would have proper people helping us in the war. It was a strange thought. End of chapter. Chapter number 4, Evaluation. "What did you mean by evaluations?" I asked Jem. Our boots clicked against the stone floors as we followed Jem out of the council chamber. The rough walls caught the light of the ceiling, giving the corridor a strangely dim look, despite the copious amounts of light tubes overhead. "You will be given a mental, physical, and combat evaluations," said Jem. "You will be sorted based on the results and assigned to a unit." He sounded like he had given the speech before, his voice faintly monotone and dull. We continued in silence for a few more feet. I started to inquire as the exact nature of the evaluations, but Clint spoke first. "Why did you join the rebellion?" asked Clint. I had been wondering the same, but I had planned to wait for a more appropriate time. Jem turned a twisting hallway deeper into the mountain. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts before answering. "After you killed the Lord Fuzi, I went back to my tribe and they declared me chief of the hunt. It was a great honor and my family was very proud of me. At first, I was happy. I had everything that I had ever wanted and life was good. But it was based on a lie. That lie gnawed at me, chewing up my insides until I could no longer stand it. I confessed what I had done to my wife and I'd hoped that she would understand, that she would help me. She did not. She grew angry and said that she did not wish to remain married to a liar who cheated his way to the top. I was upset, but I understood how she felt. It was the same way that I felt. She left me and took our children with her. The walls grew gradually smoother as the further we went, as Jim was telling his story. I watched a number of twisting hallways branch off and one wind deeper into the mountain, an intricate maze of stone tunnels and strange markings. If you didn't know your way around, you could easily get lost, which, I suppose, was the point. I would have to learn the meanings of the strange markings at the intersections or rely on someone who did to get around. The second option did not sound that appealing. Jem continued on. "I did not blame her for it. I fell from grace in my tribe and I was exiled for my shame. I went willingly. I could not bear to see the looks of the disappointment and shame in my children's eyes. I got on the first ship of Beria, looking for a new start. As it turns out, the pilot was a member of the rebellion, and he told me that they were always looking for recruits. I didn't know what else to do, so I joined up. Turns out I'm really good at venting my feelings by fighting. I quickly climbed through the ranks until the general put me in charge of the war hunters." He finished speaking, looking surprised that he'd shared that much with people that he'd only met once long ago. But we were the only thing from his past that he had seen for a long time. I imagined, and I guessed that he had wanted to connect to something from happier times. I felt bad for our rival that had led to the collapse of Jem's life. I said so. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we would cause such troubles." Jem shrugged. It wasn't your fault. If I had kept my damn mouth shut, I wouldn't be in this mess." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he did not. A faint wind whistled through the tunnel, bringing with it a faint smell of engine fumes. We must be getting near to the hangar, I thought, as I could see a faint glimmer of the natural light at the end of the tunnel before Jem took a left and we were once again under the harsh manufactured light. Clint and I walked behind Jem, neither of us saying a word, and Jem did not seem to be in the mood to talk of the initial anecdote. I tried not to look at him as I would any other being as I followed, because with the 4 eyes set into the corners of his skull, he could see everything. I tried, but it did not work. I was fascinated by the way his eyes darted this way and that, never settling on anything in particular. The deep red color of his eyes contrasted against the green of his hardened skin, just barely reflecting the light overhead. Jem stopped abruptly before a door in the wall, lifting up his arm. He turned the knob and walked in. Clint and I followed. The room was large and circular, and several doors were set into a wall in regular intervals. Set in the side of the wall was a recessed area, with a long desk placed across the opening. Around the perimeter of the room, where the wall was still whole, chairs in no particular style lined the wall. Behind the desk sat a thin, pretty Aryan. She looked up as we entered. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "New recruits here for mental evals," Jem told her. She nodded and pressed the button on her desk. "Dr. Kieb, when you're ready, there are some new recruits in the waiting room." She gestured to the chairs behind us and we sat down. Clint turned to Jem. "I don't know the rebellion had such psychotherapists. I wasn't aware that beings who didn't fight joined the rebellion. We hired them from independent systems. They may not fight, but they help those who do," said Jem. "Hired them?" I asked. "I thought the rebellion was underfunded." Jem laughed. "That was true until about 2 years ago. Cerberus pays for everything now." Seeing our confused looks, he elaborated. "Cerberus was just a minor member of the rebellion until he found some gold in his property. He made some very good investments and found several more veins of gold in others' properties. One thing led to another, and he's now the 4th richest being in the galaxy, even wealthier than the Swarm Emperor." He trailed off, remembering the story Clint had told not long ago. He cleared his throat. "Anyway, he used his wealth to purchase a great deal of supplies and resources for the rebellion. His generosity got him a seat on the council and a number of badly needed equipment and personnel." "He sent bounty hunters after us," I said in a flat voice. Jem nodded. "Yes. When Skower found out, he was livid. Cerberus was ordered to give up on his vendetta against you. Seems Clint did something truly unforgivable to his honor. He was never very specific on the details." Jem trailed off, letting the question hang unspoken in the air. Clint obliged him. "I talked to his daughter. Apparently that's a big no-no in his culture. She was worth it, though." He had a half smile on his face, eyes looking off into the distance. Jem snorted. "Well, must not be any more. She's one of the best ambassadors the rebellion has got. That job is nothing but talking." He paused. "But they did have a big falling out a year ago. That's probably what it was about." A door opened up in the wall and a short Remen stepped out, a small species reaching no more than 4 feet in height. The Remen had large pointing ears and even larger eyes, covered in a fine fur. Their faces were one of the most likable faces in the galaxy. The Remen were also renowned for the ability to read body language and emotions. It was nearly impossible to lie to a Remen, or to trick one. In short, they made excellent interrogators and psychotherapists. "Well," said the Remen, his voice high and wispy, "you two look like you've seen quite a bit." His eyes took on every inch of the frames, resting on Clint's gloved hand and my crooked right leg, and our numerous scars. He didn't seem fazed by Clint's size, even though he towered feet over the doctor. "Done quite a bit, too." He clasped his hands together in front of himself. "Who's going first?" "What are you going to do?" Clint asked. "Nothing too serious," the doctor cared. "Just a few routine questions and tests. It's best to make sure that we're not letting any spies or psychopaths join the rebellion. It shouldn't take long." He smiled with a quite friendly smile. "Might as well get this over with," growled Clint. "I'll go first." "Wonderful! Right this way, please." Gibb gestured to the door that he'd come from. Clint walked in and he followed. The door clicked shut behind him and I turned to Jem. So Scour is the military and Cerberus is the money. What about the rest of the council? The general is not the military. That's Neramac, the Rice. The general is the leadership. He keeps the rest of the council working together and focused. Krya, the Guan, is the head diplomat for our rebellion. She keeps the relationships between the rebellion and the independent systems on a good terms and persuades them to help us. It's a tough job. The Baywa Yard is the master of secrets, a pretentious title, but he is a rather eccentric being. He is in charge of the spies and the information network. Marak Parunashi is justice, the head of the judicial section of the rebellion. I was surprised at the level of organization the rebellion had. It's like you've got your own country here. I thought that it would be just a bunch of soldiers gearing up for war, but you seem to have functioning government. Jem chuckled and shook his head. You have no idea. Sometimes it seems that you can't do anything without some politician stepping in the way. Sure, Scour is in charge, but he's getting old, and he can't run everything by himself. But it's still much more efficient than most governments. Here, we're all united in one purpose against the swarm. The door to the wall banged open, and the doctor walked out of the room, pale and shaking. Marags, I won't be seeing any more patients today. I'm not feeling well. He stumbled out of the room, hand on the wall for support. I stared in shock after him as Jem and I turned our heads in unison towards the door that the doctor had stumbled out of. Clint walked out confused, look on his face. What did you do? I asked, my voice a little shaky. It took a lot to rattle a Remen, and the doctor had looked like he had been through a mixer. Clint shrugged, an innocent look in his face as he half lifted his hands. I have no idea. We were just talking about how I felt, and he turned white and left. He's covered in fuzz. I'm surprised he managed to get that color. I sighed. If Clint had scared off the psychotherapist for our war effort, that couldn't look good for his mental health report. Jem seemed unaffected by this news and turned to Merrick's at the desk. Are there any other doctors in today? He asked, his voice saying that he didn't expect there to be. She shook her head. Dr. Gregg and Julia are out today. Doctors Leah are swamped for work for the rest of the day. Jem sighed. Well, I guess yours will have to wait, he said, nodding to me. We'll move on to the physical eval then. We left the psych room and we walked down the corridor a bit. I took the time to fill Clint in on the council positions. He seemed interested in the fact that Scour was not the military leader, and that there was basically a functioning government instead of a rabble of warriors. The next door that Jem led us to was ajar and opened into a much larger room than the one that we had previously been in. But that had the same layout. Several of the chairs were filled with beings who looked up at us when we entered, then back to what they had been doing before. I leaned towards Jem and asked, This isn't the main hospital, is it? It doesn't seem big enough to accommodate an army. Oh, he replied, this is the base medical center. The field hospital is actually a hospital set up in the Namebi system. That sounded familiar, but I could not place the name. Jem motioned for us to stay here as he strode over to the desk and talked with the nurse seated behind the computer. He motioned towards us, and I could see her gaze look at us up and down before nodding and speaking into a comm. Jem walked back towards us. You will be seen as soon as possible, he said. It would be best if we took a seat. We moved to do so, but before we had even gotten to our seats, a voice came from the doorway. Clint Stone? He looked up. Standing in the doorway was the Benazi doctor, his red crest poking out from his collar and his overcoat. Yes, Clint said. Come with me, the doctor said, motioning with his hand. I grabbed Clint's arm. Try not to scare this one, I said to him. I won't, Clint said. He smirked. Well, not too badly. I shook my head as he followed the doctor out of the room. I sat down in my chair, the cushion forming around me. No sooner than I had gotten comfortable than a voice called my name from the doorway to the left of the one that Clint had gone in. Hedexchaku? I looked up to see a short, chugging nurse standing in the doorway. I raised my hand. Follow me, please. I rose and followed him through the door and into the narrow hallway behind. We walked a short distance down the hallway and into a small room with a sink, a bed covered in paper, a chair, a desk, and a few cabinets on the wall, and some medical devices I recognized but did not know the function of. The nurse guided me over to the black pad on the floor and instructed me to stand on it. It beeped, and he read out some of the numbers off of the display set into the wall and wrote them down on the clipboard that seemed to appear from thin air. "Stand straight, please." I obliged and straightened up my back and legs as much as I could. The nurse pulled a holographic line from the wall and with a wave of his hand and held it in the crown of my head. He wrote down what the wall had told him. "If you'll take a seat," he gestured with the paper-thin sheeted bed, "the doctor will be with you in a minute." I stared at the white wall for a minute until the door opened with a familiar being walking in. Bohannes, the doctor who had treated Clint and I after Fisiduk. Suddenly I realized why Numembabi had sounded so familiar. It was the system where I had taken Clint to the hospital. I had taken Clint to a rebellion hospital without even knowing. Another thing clicked into place. That must have been how Cerberus's bounty hunters found us. Cerberus probably owned the thing, and everyone must have reported back to him. Bohannes looked up from the clipboard and the nurse had filled out, and his face split with a wide smile. "So you're still alive," he said. "How's your friend?" "Fine," I said. "Is everyone we ever met in the rebellion?" It was true. Out of the small number of beings that Clint and I had any lengthy contact with, the ones that we hadn't killed or had died soon after we met them, most had ended up in the rebellion. "I have no idea," said Bohannes. He flipped through the pages of these clipboards, more sheets than the nurse had filled out. "I don't know who you know, regardless. You seem very interesting." "Interesting? What do you mean?" I asked. "It appears that you are too heavy and tall for a Jahan. In fact, you are 6 inches taller than the tallest of your species, and about 50 pounds too heavy." "What?" I asked him. He was making no sense. "What do you mean I'm too big to be a Jahan? I've been a Jahan my entire life. I should know what being a Jahan feels like." He looked at me, his tentacles twisting over his chin. "You are 5 feet 8 inches and 160 pounds. The tallest that a Jahan gets is around 5 feet, 2 inches and 100 pounds, and the amount of muscle you possess is nothing short of incredible." I was flabbergasted. I was 6 inches taller than I should be. I had been in the same height I had always been, 5 feet flat, tall for my species, hell, most species. But when I thought about it, a horrifying truth stared back at me. The doors had been getting lower, and the floor did always seem to be getting further away. I had been getting bigger for a while, ever since I'd met Clint. What the hell? I should have noticed that I was getting taller. When beings who should have been at my eye level were standing at my neck, I should have noticed. Thinking back, I realized that I'd been looking at Clint's chin for a while, when I should have been looking at his shoulder. What the hell was going on? Why was I growing, and why didn't I realize it? How? But, I struggled to put it into words, what I was feeling. Bohannes shook his head. "I have no idea what's causing it. I'm going to need to take a few samples to run a few tests before I can be sure. I am surprised that I didn't notice this earlier, when you nearly died of exhaustion, but I guess I was too busy saving your life." He put his clipboard down. "You're not afraid of needles, are you?" I shook my head. "Good. I'm going to need a blood sample and saliva sample. Don't worry, only the blood sample requires a needle." He removed a needle and syringe from the cabinet behind him, placing them on the desk. He pulled down a cleanser pad and rubbed my arm with it. He pushed the needle in my arm with a pinching sensation and pulled back the plunger. A red blood filled the syringe, and Bohannes pulled the needle out of my arm. I rubbed my arm where he had pricked me. Bohannes emptied the blood into a glass vial, setting it on the counter. "Open wide." I opened my mouth, and he ran a cotton swab across my tongue and placed that in a plastic vial, which he set next to the blood-filled vial. He turned back to me. "Now for the examination. You are much heavier than you should be. I wonder if that is due to the amount of muscle growth. Hold out your arm for me." I did, and he grasped it with his hands, running his hands along my upper arm, squeezing and prodding the muscles. He worked his way down my arm, feeding the muscles in my forearm and kneading my bones with my hands. "The amount here is not normal," he said, more to himself than to me. "I've never seen this dense of musculature before. Well, excepting Clint, those bones and muscles are harder than they should be. I wonder what is causing that. This is most intriguing." He looked up at me. Have you been taking any growth-enhancing drugs or treatments?" Before I could answer, he shook his head and muttered, "No, those would be other signs, but perhaps." He pulled a little light stick out of his pocket and he held it up to my face. "Just look over my shoulder," he said. Bones gazed at my eye, looking for what I did not know. No signs of burst veins or extended pupils. It looks as if the growth is natural, but that's impossible. We must get the tests run." He turned off his light. "I am afraid that I can't learn more until I get the test results, but I can finish the normal exam, and so I shall." He busied himself with his equipment, scanning me with a large glowing paddle, testing my reflexes and checking for abnormalities. Other than abnormal growth, that was. I was still confounded at that. I wondered at all the things that could have caused it, and I came up empty. While he examined me, Bones kept up a steady stream of conversation. "Did you and Clint ever find this Kavolka?" he asked. "Yes, and Clint got his arm back." "That's fascinating. I really must see it. Does it work as well as the old one?" "Better," I said. "He got one from the Randax that built him a new one. One he designed. It's made of titanium graphene." Bones paused. "That is truly wondrous. Can he make more? And how did he make the first one? It's made of metal, you say?" He held his hands up before I could answer. "Don't worry, I'll ask him when I examine him. I assume he's here as well. You two don't go anywhere without each other." "He's already being examined," I said. "Some Banasi doctor came to get him 1 minute before you saw me." Bones looked at me in horror. "There's someone else examining him? They don't know anything about humans or what Clint can do. This could be very bad." Dr. Bayer Huna stepped out through the small door leading into the waiting room. He looked down at his clipboard and his hand and tried to say the name written on the best he could, hoping that he did not butcher it. "Clint Stone?" "Yes." This being that answered was the biggest Bayer had he ever seen. Standing, he must have been over 6 feet tall, dwarfing Bayer's 5. His crest quivered on his back. Bayer had never been a being like this one. His species was unknown to Bayer, and he looked very strange. But Bayer wasn't going to let that stop him from doing his job. Plus, he was a curious fellow, and new things were always fun. "Come with me." Bayer waved his arm and walked back through the door. He waited in his hallway as the being walked through. He had to hunch a tiny bit to fit. It looked like he could even have made it through the door without ducking, but it never hurt to be careful. Bayer spun on his needle and led the being into the nearest exam room. "If you could please step inside and pad here," Bayer said, pointing out the black pad on the floor. The being did so, and the wall flashed with his weight. Bayer looked at it, then looked harder. 240 pounds. There was no way that was right. "Could you please step off and then back on again for me?" Bayer asked the being. "It seems to have misread your weight." "What does it say?" asked the being. 240 pounds, but I'm sure that it's a mistake." "No, that's about right," said the being. "What? There was no way that was right. 240 pounds was ridiculously heavy. The bone strength required to hold up such a mass would have to be off the charts. The only species from Deathworlds had that kind of, What planet do you come from?" asked Bayer apprehensively. "What do you mean?" Deathworld. Are you from a Deathworld?" "Yes." This was unexpected. Bayer had never seen a species from a Deathworld before. This would be very exciting. That would explain the weight. Bayer continued with the rest of the exam. "Stand straight." Bayer motioned with his hand and the line emerged from the wall. Normally, Bayer would have motioned his hand over the being's head, but this one was much too tall for that. The wall showed that this being's height was 6 feet and 3 inches. Only the Erg were taller than this being. "Is this normal for your species?" Bayer asked. "I'm a bit bigger than the average used to be," said the being. Used to be. What did he mean by that? Used to be? They're all dead. Oh, wait, last of his species. Huge, named Clint Stone. "By Hergel, you're the human," said Bayer, incredulous. He should have realized it earlier. News had spread through the rebellion like a wildfire. Clint Stone, the killer of Yutzek, Dragon Slayer, the one who had taken down the entire Thieves Guild on Baruna, and the one that had saved his niece from the Froden and Bona Prime. He, of the Metal Arm. And just recently he had joined the rebellion and announced his hatred for the Swarm Empire, the ones who killed his planet. That's me, Glintstone, the legend. How did I end up in this situation, thought Baya. What should I do now? I don't have the training to properly examine him. I'll send for Bahones. That's what I'll do. Baya remembered that Bahones had told him that he had saved Glintstone's life once, before he got his arm. I need a second opinion, said Baya. Clint nodded his acknowledgement and Baya slipped out the door. He leaned against the wall, gulping in huge breaths of air. He stood there for a while until he got his breathing and racing pulse under control. He straightened up and brushed his twitching crest across his neck. He started to make his way down the hall and saw Bahones hurrying down the hall towards him, followed by a rather tall Jahan. Thank Urga, he thought. I followed Bahones as he hurried down the hall, searching for the room with Clint in it. Ahead, I saw a doctor who had taken Clint in the first place, standing in the hallway, with a look of great relief on his face. Bahones walked up to him, and the other doctor gripped Bahones' arms. That's Glintstone in there, he said in an awed voice. Yes, I know, said Bahones, brushing the other doctor off. He opened the door and strode in, closing it behind him, leaving me with the Manazi doctor standing in the hallway. That's Glintstone in there, he said again, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Yeah, I know, I came here with him. The doctor looked at me as if realizing that I was real. I noticed that he was level with my chin. Now that I was aware of my height, I noticed a lot of things that were different. The ceilings were closer than they should have been, and when I walked, it took me fewer steps to walk the same distance as Bahones, who had taken 5 steps to my 3. It had been like that for me and Clint. But I realized that I only had to take a few more steps than Clint when he walked as well. This was going to take a bit of getting used to. You know, Glintstone, wait, you're the Jahan, the one who saved his life, the Jahan who fights. The Jahan who fights. That was a strange title, but I suppose it was fitting. My race was notorious for running and hiding. We didn't even have an army or a police force. We didn't even fight amongst ourselves. It wasn't that we didn't dislike violence, it was that violence could lead you to getting hurt. Running usually ensured that you wouldn't get hurt. We Jahan were a very selfish race. Not me so much, I thought with a wry smile. Not since Clint. Yeah, I'm TEDx. The doctor looked like he had seen a legend come to life. I had to admit, it felt good to see the awe in his face. His crest shook violently, and he turned to his left, muttering something about having other patients to attend to. He passed Gem, who was striding down the hallway. Where's Clint? The combat eval is about to start, and you two need to be there. I pointed at the door as he barged in without knocking. Clint, let's get going. We've got places to be. My apologies, Doctor, but you'll have to continue this some other time. Gem exited the room with speed. Clint followed him. I followed them. Gem hurried down the corridor outside of the waiting room and cut a sharp right. I breezed past a group of beings in the hallway who stared at Clint and I as we hurried after Gem. We reached a large door a short while later. Gem glanced at his wrist and sighed in relief. We made it in time. There is one thing you need to know before you go in there. The drill sergeant's a little different than most of the rebels. Clint, you're going to need to control yourself when the door swung open. Don't be shy, ladies. Step inside. Your lesson is about to begin, said a harsh voice. Clint turned red and his arms tensed. In the doorway stood a swarm. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.